The second loop of the Toyota Dealer 400 was to take competitors through some superb Mpumalanga scenery. With the intense competition, crews did not have time to enjoy it, and at the front of the production car field, there was a huge scrap going on between race leaders Duncan Foss and Ralph Pitchford and the Castle Toyota pair of Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton.
Behind the two frontrunners, Hein Lateghan and Chris Birkin had slotted into third in the second of the Castrol Toyota factory cars. They were around 2 minutes behind the leaders and ready to pounce if the cars ahead ran into problems. Chasing after the factory car, Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst were also having a good run in the RFS Toyota Hilux. After an accident on the Sun City 400, the pair needed a good result to restore their confidence. Confidence was not a problem for special vehicle leaders Evan Hutchinson and Achim Bergman in the Motorite Revo 1 4x4. The pair already had 4 wins behind them, but were headed for retirement when they hit a rock and redesigned the Revo's 1 suspension.
The Donaldson Nissan crew of Norwegian Ivar Tollefsen and Britain Quinn Evans went into the Toyota Dealer 400 in third in the championship, only 1 point behind Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen in the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux. The Nissan crew tend to blow hot and cold, but were having the better of the scrap. Tollefsen and Evans were putting together a solid race, but were starting to come under some pressure from teammates Hannes Grobler and Johan Moore after an early puncture cost them a fair amount of time. The veteran Grobler and Moore were pushing hard, and with less than 10 minutes separating the first 8 cars, the battle for the top 5 finish was a fierce one. Also mixed up in it were Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer, with the turbo diesel Ford Ranger again showing enormous potential. Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder were also going along steadily in the SP Laser Nissan in what was a final shakedown outing before the 2010 Dakar Rally in Argentina.
With the demise of Evan Hutchinson and Achim Bergman, veterans Nardis Alberts and Jeff Minott found themselves in the lead in the special vehicle category, with the Rapsa Chev sounding healthy. The Class P situation had changed yet again, with Johan van Staden and James Rousseau now second overall, and leading Class P following the retirement of championship leaders David and Gary White in the Ruhr Combat.
After a solid performance on the first loop, Terence Marsh and Peter Groenewald were headed for retirement on the second, when they also hit a rock and broke the suspension on the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. George and Sharon Barkhuizen in the AIM Toyota Hilux were another crew who would fail to see out the distance, while Kobus van Tonde and Rian Guapa were still going along steadily in the Unifreight Ford Ranger, although they were later to be hampered by a differential problem 20 kilometers from the finish line.
The big movers on the day were KwaZulu-Natal crew Don Thompson and Hjalmar van Gesselen, who started the day 29th on the road and had scythed their way through the field in the Zarko, running in Class P. Crews later raved about the Loop 2 route, which had a little of everything. Among the happy teams were Chris de Plooy and Henk Janssen van Vieren, despite getting stuck in a hole and losing power steering on the RFS Toyota Hilux. It was also turning into another adventurous outing for Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakos, with the Ford Ranger down on power.
A puncture and the loss of all electronics plagued Higo and Jaap de Bruin on Loop 1, and then the Micra and Excel Toyota Hilux completed Loop 2 with only two-wheel drive working. Rundle and Thomas, though, streaked past Berthold nonetheless.
The racing gods were still not smiling on Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakos, with their race developing into a stop-start affair, with the road fire extinguisher simply adding to their trials and tribulations. There's some days where you should have just stayed in bed, and for Rundle and Giannakos, this appeared to be one of them.
Matters were going a lot better for reigning Class B champions Johan and Etienne Besaidnout in the Adenco Bat, although the Cape-based brothers were being shadowed by Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson in the Regent Racing Bat. The two special vehicles were making good progress, and you had to give Thomas Rundle and Stavros Giannakos credit for perseverance, with the pair once again mobile in the turbo diesel Ford Ranger. Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen were being hampered by a fuel pump problem, with a rock also damaging a side shaft on the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux, and they dropped back a place or two.
The event was turning into a good one for Class P crews, who were well represented in the top 10 and giving the Class A runners a hard time. There were also some good scraps going on between Class P crews, with veterans Richard Schilling and Mick Oosthuizen in the ACECO fighting to hold off Archie Rutherford and Craig Doubtfire in the Regent Racing Jimco.
With a clutch problem sidelining Simon Beckett and Tim Curtis in the Century Racing Bat, the Class B lead had been taken over by Cape driver Derek de Toy and stand-in co-driver Steve Harris in the Orange Tree Bat. A local crew was leading Class D with brothers Johan and Werner Horn looking for a repeat of their Toyota 1000 Desert Race victory in the Malalan Toyota Land Cruiser. A little further back, Leroy Polter and Rob Howie in the Ferodo Nissan Hardbody was still in charge of Class E despite a broken shock absorber and brake problems on the first loop.
At the second service halt, the Donaldson Nissan Navara of Duncan Voss and Rolf Pitchford was still leading the two Castrol Toyota Hilux factory entries in the closest race of the season.
After Loop 2, the gap between the leaders was only 34 seconds, with less than 5 minutes separating the first 8 cars.
Still leading the special vehicles after 2 laps were Nardis Alberts and Jeff Minute. A feature of the leaderboard was the presence of no fewer than 6 Class P cars.